welcome once again to the DRH show. Today I'm joined by a senior lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University, Dr. Poppy Gibson. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, lovely to see you, Dennis.
Well, great to have you here, Dr. Gibson. Now, of course, I understand that before you became a senior lecturer, you spent over a decade working in London primary schools. Now, paint us a picture of your background and your trajectory in life. Did you always want to be a teacher?
Oh, yeah, so this is a good question. I always wanted to be a teacher, even when I was a child myself. I always loved that idea of finding out new things, challenging ourselves, learning. So I always knew that was my pathway. So I trained to be a teacher. And as you rightly said, Dennis, I worked in a range of schools in London, did a master's in education, did an EdD in education as well. And it was at that point I started working with adult learners instead of primary children. And I was kind of at a crossroads. I was thinking, do I want to be a head teacher and stay in primary schools? But this job that I got working at Birkbeck University in central London actually opened up my eyes to the satisfaction that I could get from working with adult learners on their own journeys. And it was just from there, really, I was just finishing my thesis that I saw a role come up to work in university. And I just thought, let's take a risk and go for it. I didn't think there was any chance I would get a lecturing job after being in primary schools for so long. So also a message to any teachers watching, go for it. And that's it really. I've been a lecturer now, just finished my 4th year, and now a senior lecturer at Anglia Ruskin, as you say.
Lovely trajectory, Dr. Gibson. Now, let's talk more about your thesis for your EdD. I understand you look into young girls' experiences of using social media. This is a very interesting topic. Could you tell us more about your findings, and why did you specifically look for young girls as opposed to, young boys?
Great. Well, thank you as well for being aware of my thesis. That's wonderful. It really came from a place because I was teaching in schools at the time, and I had seen how using social media myself as an adult was affecting my well-being. Seeing other people around you on amazing holidays with beautiful homes, and you feel like maybe what you're doing isn't good enough. Seeing people's, looking amazing in swimwear and thinking maybe my body's not good enough. And then I realized that more and more of the children that I was working with were accessing these online platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and obviously they all have age limits, but we know that a lot of children are just putting in fake dates and still accessing them. So looking at the statistics that showed so many girls were suffering with eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, children that were self-harming as young as 6 years old. We were seeing the rates of anxiety and depression in children skyrocketing. I just thought that is what I wanted to look at. And obviously we know there's also a separate issue with boys speaking up for how they're feeling. But the statistics show that generally it is girls that are coming out higher in a lot of these areas. So I thought that's what I need to focus on. Why are young girls going on these online spaces when it's seeming to have such a detrimental effect on their well-being, on their identity formation? And especially because I looked at young girls that were age 8 to 11, so they were like key stage 2 in primary school. I thought this is such a critical point just before they're reaching puberty and, finding their independence. We need to see what is happening at this age range and explore, are there kind of strategies, interventions, better way we need to speak with our children to ensure they're equipped to go online.
Absolutely. And I understand that you're also looking for ways on how we could actually use technology such as social media, especially in relation to teaching, on how we could use this to, for education purposes. But my question for you, Dr. Gibson, is, of course, there's conflicting research that, that the relentless use of technology has shortened our attention span, rather. And I think this is the goldfish effect. But as an educator, how do you think we can, effectively use social media for education?
So firstly, Dennis, I do think you're right. I think there are definitely these negative elements of social media, such as you rightly say, affecting our attention span. I know I can't even watch a TikTok without getting bored. I don't know if that's just me. But I do think that there are so many positives. Like, I've connected with you through Twitter. So there are so many ways that we can connect with others, that we can share knowledge, that we can be inspired. So particularly for teachers, I think using a platform such as Twitter, obviously other platforms are available, you can see what other people are doing, you can ask for inspiration, and you can challenge your own ideas, because I think to be a good educator, you need to be a lifelong learner as well. So it's actually when we look outside of our box and see what others are doing, that we can question our own beliefs, our pedagogy, and continue to improve what we're doing in our practice as well.
And I believe that the purpose of education is to meet halfway. I'm sorry. I suppose not purpose is not the right term, but I suppose the effective pedagogy, as you've mentioned earlier, is to meet halfway where the students are actually are. They're spending their time on social media. So I think it's best to meet them at a place where they already are, and then take them to where they should be. Um, of course, we've met on Twitter, and since then you've been writing a number of articles on PsychReg. And for your first article on PsychReg, you've actually co-authored a piece with Dr. Robert Morgan, where you talk about the strategies for promoting resilience in the classroom. And this is a topic which is really close to my heart, because for my PhD, I'm actually looking for ways on how we could build resilience to young people. But talk us through, why is resilience important, especially within the context of education?
Great question. Firstly, can I just say your thesis sounds amazing. I can't wait to read that in the future. So please just put me down for a copy. But you're right, resilience is so key. And when we first started hearing this word in the world of education, probably about 10 years ago or so, I was still a teacher. And I remember hearing these words like resilience and grit and thinking, were these just new buzzwords that were coming out? Because now and again in education, as you know, Dennis, we see these new kind of terms. But the more I read around resilience, it made me realize it's not just about being tough. It's also about knowing yourself and knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And I think when you're an educator that is so busy and giving so much of yourself on a daily basis, being resilient doesn't mean just keep doing things when it's hard. It's also knowing when you need to take a break. So even you said about social media, even taking a social media break is part of making you more resilient, because it's knowing your limits, it's reacting to those limits as well. And also thinking, when things are hard, let's pause, let's evaluate, and let's reflect on what we're doing. I think how we can do it in a different way or a smarter way. So being resilient doesn't just mean being tough. Actually, it's accepting that we can be weak as well.
Absolutely. That's one of the most common metaphor that we attribute to resilience, that it's, being tough, being gritty. But as you've rightly mentioned, it's more about managing your emotion, really, so that you become more positively, you react positively with the situations. Of course, as an educator, let's go back to talking about you being an educator. I've read a lot of literature that it's really important that we put young people within the heart of decision-making process. But the question is, how do we actually do that? How do we place young people at the heart of decision-making process within the classroom? And is it really important that we try to achieve that?
That's such a thoughtful point. And you're right, of course we must. The learner is our user of what we're giving out. So whether that's a primary school pupil that's 5 years old or an adult learner like I teach now at university, we need to know how they're accessing the content and responding to things that are working well for them to continue to improve our practice. So there are a few ways we can do this. In primary school, we can have things like a school council or a pupil voice group. And they are where we can have students from each class to get together with normally an allocated teacher or class teacher and share, what have they enjoyed, what projects have worked well, what would they like to do in the future. So kind of what you said earlier, Dennis, about we need to meet students halfway. It should be that way in the classroom. If we get to know our learners, we can provide something that they will hopefully better engage with. And it's the same with adults. So for example, if we use social media again as an example, I know that many of my students enjoy using apps, using websites, and sharing their thoughts digitally. So there are some really great tools out there. For example, Mentimeter is an anonymous student tool. So I know students enjoy using their phones. So there is a place in my lectures or seminars where I'll say, share what you think, and they'll type in their answer on their phone. They'll like log in with a code, and then it will come up on my giant screen in the lecture theatre, and we can use those thoughts as a stimulus. So putting the students at the start of our discussion, not just, talking at them, but thinking, reading the room, where are we at, and let's learn together from there. So I think it's so important to have the pupils involved in their teaching. And obviously there are some things that they can't control that are managed by the school or the university, but I think wherever possible, if you can have them at the front of their learning, they're more likely to be engaged, to be motivated, and then hopefully have better outcomes at the end of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know what, Dr. Gibson, I was born in the 80s, so way back when I was at school, we put educators in a different context way back then. I don't know if children still call their teacher like Mr. or Miss,
yeah, many schools do, many do.
Overly polite, but I think like what you've said, we're progressing towards asking school children whether how they could effectively learn. And so my question to you is, do you think educators now are ready to create leaders that we need for tomorrow?
Oh my goodness, yes. So we have got at the moment this amazing workforce of teachers, whether they're primary, secondary, or at FE or HE level, because we have got teachers that are, well, firstly, have either trained or taught through the pandemic. So we've got teachers that are perhaps some of the most resilient and mentally healthy, aware educators that I think I've ever seen. So we have definitely got the best range of future leaders. And I think what's important now is ensuring that, like where we can learn from others and collaborate, that we're doing this to the best of our ability to manage our workload. Because I think, although probably every teacher I know, probably every follower on my Twitter could be the next amazing leader, what sometimes lets us down is, well, firstly, our self-confidence or our self-efficacy and our belief we can do it. But secondly, also finding the time to explore that pathway. So I think when we can work together with others, for example, I've had quite a lot of people I've written little pieces with, actually one recently on PsychReg, so thanks for that. Someone who didn't think that they were confident enough to write. A platform such as yours is a great way for giving people the confidence to know that they have something to say, that they can say it, and then hopefully inspire them to go on and do further things and be leaders. Because we're all leaders in our own way, and I think sometimes people just need a boost. So also thanks again for your amazing platform.
Yeah, thank you. So for everyone who's watching, I'll put the link on the description box for all the articles that you've co-authored with two of your students. So they could read this work. But of course the education system keeps on changing, but how should education system change to address specifically the learning needs of young people?
Oh, that's a really good question. If I'm really honest, Dennis, I was hoping as we returned to schools after the pandemic, because as you know, a lot of primary schools were locked down, even at the university level, we were locked down and remote learning. I was hoping that particularly at primary level, we would see some kind of curriculum reform. Obviously, the curriculum we use in primary schools was published in 2014. So you're talking about nearly 10 years ago. So we're using a curriculum that was made before most of our children were born, before a lot of our teachers even trained. So I do think we need a reform. And what I would love to see, the way that education could change, is putting our mental health as a key subject. At the moment, obviously, there's a very big focus in the UK on the academic side of primary learning. So we have the core subjects of English and maths at the forefront of everything we do, which often means that these monopolize our primary teaching timetable. But I think what's important is remembering that, particularly through the pandemic, we saw the importance of getting outside, making social connections. And these are what we need to help pupils prepare to do, so they can be the best member of society they can, so they can be happy and healthy. we need to teach them. I mean, if I could make a curriculum, Dennis, it would have something like relationships as a core subject, like relationship with yourself, relationship with friends, for those people that want to have a relationship with a partner or with families. That's what we need, is I think a focus on well-being and mental health and getting to know ourselves. And then when we're happy, as you know, we can learn better as well. So if I could have a magic wand, I would want to see mental health and well-being as a core subject.
Now, in relation to these trends and what we want to see in the curriculum, have you seen any emerging trends in the education sector that you're excited about?
Oh, I mean, there's always new things coming out in education. I think the one thing that is getting stronger over the past kind of 5-10 years is definitely outdoor learning. So seeing the opportunities to take your learners outdoors, even if you have a tiny space, thinking of what you can do to inspire them, to open up that kind of interest and curiosity in the world around them. But I think also seeing what's happening in social media is the chance for this global connectedness. So thinking, how could you get your pupils to connect with other pupils, obviously with parental consent, but to connect with others and really show them that we are this united planet and that there are other children around the world. I think things like that are really exciting. So things like pen pal schemes, now we have such an easy way to communicate with other countries, is something that a lot of teachers should explore.
Absolutely. Now, of course, you've spent a number of years, being in the education sector, so you probably come across a number of misconceptions. So if you could just identify some of these misconceptions about the education sector and kind of address them.
Ooh. Do you know the main one that is everywhere at the moment, because it's the summer holidays, I think is thinking that teachers get a 6-week break. So I've actually been really pleased to see on Twitter a lot of teachers with a suitcase going to a different part of the country or going abroad. That is really pleasing, because I know in the pandemic, a lot of teachers couldn't take a physical break from their space. But I think, people that think teachers are only teaching 9 till 3 and have a 6-week summer, that is definitely not true. When you're an educator, you are thinking about your learners all of the time. You're always planning, reflecting, wanting to improve your practice. So I think that's the main misconception. And a lot of people as well think, oh, you must be on summer break now because my university students are on a break, but I'm now busy marking dissertations. And you know how long these are, Dennis. So at the moment, a lot of my time is now marking student work. So I think an educator's role is a year-round role. I think that's the main misconception.
Yes, it's not like any other 8 to 5 job that when you get home, it stops. As you've said, there are lots of markings to do. Let's move on to slightly different topic, Dr. Gibson. So you mentioned earlier that you also have an interest in identity and community. And I also understand that you have an interest with comparison between online and real life identity. So tell us some of the work that you've been doing within this area.
Oh, great. So I've done quite a lot of exploration at the moment with university students and thinking how their identity is managed. I actually did a study through the pandemic where I had students that were communicating online with each other, usually using Microsoft Teams. And a lot of them had their camera off and all you could see was their initials in a circle. So it's very interesting to speak to them, how was that educational experience for them? And now seeing when they come back to campus and meet their peers, some of them are complete strangers because some of them didn't feel confident enough to speak in the online seminars. So when others are saying, oh, I recognize your voice, even though they don't know each other's faces. So it's a very interesting one, seeing how online study affects us. Just between me and you, Dennis, and the viewers, I've actually just put in an ethics study to work with a colleague of mine, Steve, and we're hoping if we pass the ethics that we will explore how potentially online study affects the consumption of pornography online. So we're really interested. Steve has done a study into whether home working, so for those people that were, forced out of the office in the pandemic to work from home on their laptop, did that encourage the consumption of pornography? And so together, he and I are hoping to study, actually, does online study also promote or not promote this behavior as well? So that's an up and coming one.
Sounds interesting. Yeah, of course, the more we spend time online, there are other, there are other contents that we can access. So, it will be interesting to, to see what goes on with young people, how they spend their time online. I also understand that you conduct research in conversation analysis. For those who's not familiar with, the research parlance, could you just explain to us what is conversation analysis?
Yes, so conversation analysis can involve looking at the discourse of how we communicate. So, for example, for my EdD thesis, I was looking at how these young girls communicated on a blog. So, for safeguarding, I set up a blog that they could only access once I had their consent forms. They could log in and communicate. So, the discourse analysis there of their conversation was looking when did they echo each other's words? When were they using the same emojis as each other? How did they respond to each other in this online space? And equally, conversation analysis can be when we have focus groups, when we observe people, obviously with their consent in a study, seeing how they communicate. And I think that's what's so interesting is looking, do we communicate the same way when we're face to face, or does that change when we're online? Do we, when we're hiding behind an avatar that we've made of ourselves or a picture, even on Twitter, you can see not everyone has their face as their profile picture. Does that give us the confidence to act in a different way? And obviously this is sometimes where we see trolls coming online, those keyboard warriors that are hiding behind that mask. So yeah, it's really interesting just seeing how conversations change in different spaces.
And of course, when it comes to carrying out research, I understand that you particularly enjoy ethno-methodological practices. And you've mentioned earlier that we met on Twitter, and something about ethno-methodology has been going on Twitter, and this is about Carl Anderson ethno-methodological paper. So I was just wondering, what's your take on that? Because that's kind of a research practice that you enjoy.
So I was wondering if you're going to ask me about this study, Dennis. So obviously I cannot condone that study in any way. It horrifies me to think how this has passed. I know we just spoke about ethics, but how this has passed the ethical procedures that we have in place, how the supervisor of this student would have agreed such a study to take place. And I think for anyone watching this that is going through applying for ethics, and thinking, my goodness, this is a long-winded process. Like, why is the ethics process so long? I think when this study has come out and been highlighted, it has made us appreciate why ethics needs to be so rigorous to protect the researcher and the participant. Obviously, in this study, it was the same person, but I just think the whole study is questionable. And although it's important, as I mentioned, I'm hoping to do a study into pornography. We need to look at, some of these areas, but this was certainly not the way this should have been approached. And I think, yeah, it certainly raises that red flag in academia. Who is, checking these ethical procedures? And also with journals, to remember that peer review process needs to be equally rigorous as well, to ensure that the research that is coming out is of value and is safe, and appropriate to be out in the world as well.
But of course, we could also not discount the fact the way Mr. Anderson has been, treated on Twitter. It's more like, trial by Twitter. Of course, all of us have different opinions about the kind of approach that he did with his research, and of course, it's a matter of academic opinion. But just for me, I just don't really appreciate the way he was treated on Twitter, especially that he's a PhD student. It's his first paper that he published. Of course, you would expect if it's your first research paper, there would be lapses, there would be flaws. But like what you've mentioned, it's really important that we focus on the ethics application and the process, especially when you mention ethics application. I can totally relate with that, because my ethics application is still in limbo, but hopefully I get the approval very soon, so I could
fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it reassures you, Dennis, that means it's being checked thoroughly, and then this means that your study will be really successful. So good luck.
Yeah, but my question for you, especially from someone who's been there, how do you find motivation to write?
Oh, this is a good question, and I get this a lot as well. This is where I think social media can actually be a motivator. So one thing that I used to do, if I had a writing deadline, is just put on Twitter in the morning, like aiming for 500 words today or something. And then you kind of feel like once you've put that out there, or even if it's not on social media, if you're not someone who uses it, I used to say to like friends or family, right, I'm doing 500 words today, even though they probably were never going to read it, just like almost manifesting into the universe that I was going to do something. And then at the end of the day saying, look, I did 550, sending them a photo of my Word document, word count in WhatsApp or something, just to prove to them and myself that I was doing it. So I think sometimes saying you're going to do it makes you more inclined to do it. But also, I think it can come down to self-bribery. So I used to say to myself, right, if I write 1,000 words today, if I proofread this chapter today, if I submit this article, I'm getting a takeaway tonight or whatever your thing is that makes you happy. So also sometimes we need to go back to good old behaviorists like B.F. Skinner and think we need to set ourselves a reward and then work hard to meet it. So sometimes I actually have to just like educate myself.
For me, I really enjoy the writing process because I contribute a lot of articles online for publications. And I mentioned this on Twitter last night that when I write for online publications, my aim is really to be, to be read. I want it to be readable. But the problem is, like when you write a PhD, sometimes it seems that people favor a more a more formal approach with writing. That sometimes that you sometimes think that do I have to make this stilted and boring writing, because and the way I write, because I'm a blogger, is the way I talk. But when you write a PhD, you just sometimes you have you make a conscious effort that I have to put furthermore, I have to put moreover, and that's just like in real life we don't really talk like that. But I suppose you just have to acknowledge that academia is really a different ecosystem as opposed to writing for the general public. But those are really good tips. I suppose you have to kind of bribe yourself just to get on with your academic writing. And for me, it's always pizza.
But that's why as well, Dennis. I think that's why your blog is so great, because I think depending what you want to write, sometimes finding a collaborator, like the amazing collaborators that I've had with you, and then saying, right, let's write something. Sometimes just, creating that piece for a blog then gives you that inspiration and motivation to go on to do something more. So actually, I think I would strongly encourage people to, submit something to you for consideration for your blog, because sometimes that's what you need, is like planting the seed through writing that blog post. And actually that's where the inspiration and motivation can come, is finding that collaborator. So again, back to what we were saying about networks, if you find someone who's interested in the same topic, why not come together, write together? And that's a great way to keep motivated, set a deadline. So let's write this in the next week or 2 weeks. You've got someone else there to bounce ideas off. And then sometimes starting with that blog post opens the door for, further writing to come. So yeah, thank you again for your blog. That's also a great way to inspire others.
Yes, thank you as well for mentioning, that I think the importance of science communication. You don't have just to limit your work as a researcher within academia. But if you write with, not just Psychridge, of course, there's Psychology Today and Very Well Mind and all these platforms that I look up to. You make your science more accessible to the wider public. And I think one of the best ways to test yourself if you're really good with science communication, if you could simplify what your finding is to make it more accessible to a wider audience. And I think you've kind of demonstrated that with with the online articles that you're writing, that you've also co-authored. And I think I want to see more of that with with academics, because we don't have to deny it that sometimes we're just kind of reading our own work. You don't really expect teachers, I suppose, or students to access these academic journals. But if you kind of repackage your writing into blog posts in something more accessible, and even doing this interview, you widen the reach of your research, and I think that's really important as an educator and as an academic. But let's move on again to other aspect of your work. Of course, you do kind of research in education and some things about cyber psychology, but you're also doing research about animal assisted therapy. What makes an animal suitable for therapy work?
Oh, so yes, my other favorite topic is definitely thinking about therapy animals. Did you know, Dennis, though, that it's not just dogs that can be a therapy animal? So we often think dogs are, the go-to therapy animal, but as you'll know, we can find any animal with the qualities, an animal that has got a calm behavior, an animal that is happy being around people, because we need to think about the well-being of the animal, of course, as well as the person who's going to be interacting with the animal. So we've actually seen horses can be very popular with people to support their well-being. Chickens, so I actually have therapy chickens myself. I've got a flock of 4 chickens that are my therapy chickens. But many animals can be therapeutic. There's even a study where they put people in front of a fish tank full of fish and an empty fish tank, and it showed that the people that were in front of the fish tank full of fish actually had higher levels of happiness and better well-being than the empty tank. So it even showed that being near a fish tank, there doesn't even have to be an animal you can touch or with fur or anything. It's not necessarily about a sensory animal. So I thought that was quite a cool study. Actually, just having animals around us, or many forms of ecotherapy, such as even just being around plants, bringing plants into your house, taking a walk on your lunch break. These are all things, being around nature and around animals can support our well-being as well. But as long as an animal's happy being around you, any animal can be therapeutic.
Absolutely. And of course, the goal of this animal assisted therapy is to promote mental health and well-being. But based from your research and based from your the literatures that you've read, what else can we do to prevent burnout, especially within the education sector, within the academia? It's teeming with like burnout inducing scenarios.
Yeah, really good. I think the main thing is just taking a break. So this could be taking a social media break. So I know at the moment we've got lots of brilliant things on Twitter, like people taking photos of their classrooms that look amazing, with all their laminates up on the wall. I think, if you're finding that overwhelming because your workspace isn't looking like that, just take a social media break. Just don't compare yourself to others. Equally, just take a break. Like sometimes I think I just need to leave the laptop and the phone at home, just scoot to the beach, take a walk, and just leave technology at home is actually a great way we can avoid burnout. Or find another hobby or something you enjoy, pick up a new hobby, even if it only lasts a week. So just think, I want to learn how to, bake cupcakes or whatever, interests you, plant some seeds, even if they don't grow. You've had that space to try something new. And that's going to, support your well-being because you're feeling like you found a new thing, you're making new neural pathways in your brain, and enjoying an activity that isn't work. So I think the main message there, Dennis, is find things that aren't work to fill some of your time. But I guess it's hard when you love work as well. Just find time to switch off.
Yes. It's really important to have a bit of self-care. Like what you've said, it's important to separate work from leisure. But on a less serious note, what would you say are the highlights of your career so far?
Oh wow! Well, obviously this interview with you, Dennis. But I think every job I worked in had its highlights. So just being with the learners was a highlight in itself. But I think finally becoming a lecturer a few years ago felt like a real highlight because it felt like I had learnt enough in the classroom. So it was 11 years I was a primary school teacher and worked up into management. But it felt like, wow, I actually have enough to speak to others about, which, is a good boost for yourself. And then I think becoming a senior lecturer a few years ago was a really good boost as well. And I've just recently completed my PG cert in higher education, learning and teaching. So this was a great opportunity that Anglia Ruskin University gave to me as a new member of staff. And it involved a year-long course where I was reflecting on my use of assessment, reflecting on how I teach, how I support students. So I just graduated from that this summer. So that's really exciting. So on top of my qualified teacher status as a primary teacher from a very long time ago, it feels really great to now have a qualification in higher education as a university lecturer. So again, for any academics who've not done a PG cert, I would strongly recommend that as well.
Thank you. Now, let's wrap this up with some quick fire questions. What were you afraid of as a child?
Oh, afraid of. I think I just was afraid of like being bored. Maybe not afraid, but I think I've always enjoyed finding new opportunities in life. So I think as a child, my worst times were thinking that, I wasn't going to be going out the house today. There was nothing new to learn. So again, I think that fueled my passion as an educator. And even now, the thought of like no more studying or no more reading probably terrifies me. That makes it sound like a real academic. But yeah, the thought of no more learning is a bit scary.
Yes. And what is your favorite word in another language?
Oh, okay. So I speak a few languages, but I think my favorite word is Apfelkuchen, which is apple cake in German. I just remember learning it and thinking it was so cute.
And if you weren't an academic, what would you have pursued in life?
Oh, if I wasn't an academic, do you know what, Dennis? I think I would love to be a foster carer. So maybe that's teaching in a different way, but yeah, I think I would just love to be supporting children on their journeys.
And finally, the floor is all yours. Tell us what else is in the pipeline. If people wanted to reach out to you, what platforms can they get in touch with you at?
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Dennis. So I've kind of got another ethics application just in at the moment with Ruth, Robert and Adam. We're putting in a study to look at gender and looking at ambition in teacher trainees. So we want to speak to students who are on teacher training programs and talk to them, what is their pathway? Do they want to be head teachers? Where do they see themselves going in the future? There's actually something really interesting, Dennis, just to highlight. When you look on Twitter, you can see most primary teachers seem to be identifying as female, but when we look at people that are in management in primary schools, we seem to be, they are mostly men. So we thought it'd be really interesting to explore, how does this influence and motivation on leadership come? So that's currently with the ethics board, so watch this space. But currently writing other bits, I'm writing with a fantastic student, Danny, on grief and loss and how grief and loss affect children's learning. So that's another area I'm really interested in. There's so many more things, but if you're interested, anyone watching and want to communicate and perhaps work together on something on mental health or wellbeing or teaching, then feel free to follow me on Twitter at Poppy Gibson UK, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I think Dennis might have the link for that on his website.
Yes, I'll put all of those on the description note, and those are really exciting projects.
Thank you.
Dr. Poppy Gibson, educator and senior lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University. It's great to have you here on the DRH show, and I look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and good luck with the thesis.